is what I'd like us, this is what I would love for us to get through today is we did a little bit of getting to know the group, talking about what I mean by large scale event. So we'll talk about my experience, a bit of storytelling around that, then have some actual actionable advice. How you can plan an experience. Oh, I see a typo there for people you might not even meet. How to set expectations, getting buy-in from departments, and some takeaway and conclusions. So again, for some more questions, so are you used to being, for everyone here, are you used to being the main point of contact for all your volunteers at your organization? For example, by that I mean, will all the information come through you? Will you be the person that they check in with at their shift? Are you used to creating that experience? And are you the person who creates that experience directly and that sense of belonging by who you are and what you do at your organization? Can also just reply in the chat. Even if you're like, it can just be like, yes and no, I like that. You know, it doesn't have to be perfect, but really thinking of, I like it. We have Ode here who is like, yes, um, and how it can like change or shift. Share it together with your colleagues in the volunteer office. I like it, like, yes, but not always. So again, it can change, but really what can happen in that experience? Other staff who might manage them. So even the thinking of that, have you ever had to manage volunteers at a large scale event? And what was anything that stayed with you about managing volunteers at an event that might be different than managing volunteers in a longer and sustained process? If you have, you know, very set volunteering requirements, did anything feel differently from event-based volunteer management to organizational volunteer management? Also, don't have to, it's a massive, intense, short-lived experience. I love what you described there, Robin. That's very accurate. And I think that's something that we can all share. So, what do we mean by how big are we talking when it comes to the events I'm talking about? I see Natalia says, yes, it can feel less personable, and there's different experiences as a volunteer manager about what that looks like. So the two cases I'll be talking about here are my experiences with Nocturne, which is Halifax's version of Nuit Blanche. It is art at night festival. It happens every October. It's an annual recurring event. Um, it used to be just one night. During the pandemic, was spread out over to 3 nights, and now it's back to just being one night, the Saturday. Unlike in Toronto, it does not run for 12 hours, it runs for 6 hours, but it's still a big burst of activity for that period of time. There's typically about 100 artists, minimum 50 locations, and minimum 160 volunteers. The second event I'll be talking about, I can't believe it's already 3 years ago, but we worked on it for years, was the 2023 North American Indigenous Games that happened over 8 days, 60 locations, and we had over 3,000 volunteers. So those are different scales, but still very both significant as they happen all over the city. So this is the scale of the map of last year's Nocturne. Those are all those dots, different colored dots, they're different zones, but where they happen, for those of you who know Halifax, the city, there's the peninsula, and across the harbor is Dartmouth. So you can see that over here. So we were connected, and we had a project as well on the ferry, which is why it's colorful. But you can see all of those points where there was activations and projects happening. And if you can imagine one volunteer manager, which is myself, I also had a volunteer assistant last year when I worked it, even if it's 6 hours, you can't reach all 50 locations. Then for the North American Indigenous Games, this is the venue map. And it doesn't look like too much, But there's also, as you can see, there was also the rifle range we were at, golf that was out over here. This was 60 locations across the city. This included locations for all the 16 sports. There was more than 16 venues for those 16 sports. And there was also one that was in Millbrook First Nation, so about an hour and a half away from downtown. This included accommodations and also cultural venues. So while there wasn't dots for absolutely everything, 60 locations, even if you're running, you cannot possibly meet every single 3,000 person volunteer, as our volunteering usually ran from about 6 a.m. to midnight, all of those 8 days. So it was very large scale. So again, when it comes to what are these events anyways, Nocturne, again, it's contemporary art festival. And as well as having those 160 volunteers and almost 100 artists, there's 65,000 attendees during that 6 hour period. People who are out and about in the city and who are taking it in. When it first, and what is a success about this as well is that it's been running continuously since 2008. If you do follow art festivals, longevity and even being able to plan a 20-year anniversary is a really big deal. For the North American Indigenous Games, the first games, official games were in 1992. It was brainchild of Douglas Cardinal, who was a survivor of the residential school system, as well as a lawyer and an athlete. And his athleticism and engagement in sport is what saved him. And the connection with other Indigenous youth he viewed as vital to the well-being of all Indigenous youth. So it's both a sporting event, it's competitive for athletes ages 13 to 19. And it as well as a cultural event. So it has many cultural activities, components, cultural awareness, and is imbued into every aspect of it. Volunteer experience, everybody who is there. And there was one extremely large cultural village and two smaller ones that were also sites. There was over 750 nations represented out of the 5,000 athletes who came. So again, that's 5,000 athletes, 3,000 volunteers, and as it says, 60 locations. And there was 60,000 hours that were contributed just the week of the games. And the lead up of other committees and people contributing in other events before, we calculated it was about 100,000 hours in all overall volunteer hours to make the games happen. So those are the scales that we're talking about, and those are the points of reference. I've also worked at um, the Sail GP Grand Prix, but that was a smaller volunteer, but again, massive sporting event that brought 50,000 viewers out, and conferences. I've worked at multi-site with volunteers, but those are the two ones we're talking about. So with I see your question, Saskia, I'll get to that a little bit. I do plan on talking about training. So with 3,000 volunteers or even with 160, you can't meet them all. You can't create that one-on-one connection as a way of creating that sense of belonging. You're creating systems at scale for creating that, and systems that support and create that experience, even though you might never meet each other. So, and it has to be processes that work on a scale as well. So yes, when you're not the point of contact. So even with the 160, you might, because it is for that one night and it is a one-off, you might never meet them. So how do you still ensure that they're going to have a positive experience, even if they're not meeting you and doing in-person training? So I have a few things that I will recommend. First is creating that sense of belonging and a sense of connection. And the reason that people want to be part of a one-off festival, cultural event, or something is because it is one of. Even if it's a recurring event such as Nocturne, or something North American Indigenous Games, the 2023 version, it was the first time it was ever in Halifax since its inception in the early 90s. And so really building on that importance of contributing to an idea. With NAG, we really formulated it as being like joining a movement, being volunteering as part of the reconciliation process. That was part of our messaging. Contributing to art and community is part of the messaging for Nocturne, but really that creating that sense that they're joining something bigger than themselves, which we know that we do for recruitment otherwise in organizations. Um, but really the mission and the drive about what that event or festival might be doing, the mission will really drive your recruitment. And so early adopters become volunteer program advocates. And so by winning over the people that you do meet and getting them to understand the mission, getting them to understand the importance of it, if it is one-on-one meeting or meeting at a training or at an outreach event, they will then also become part of that. So ensuring that the belonging and connection is imbued into everything that you do. As I put this as a bit of a joke, but it's not really. Belonging and connection, I'll bring in some other images about that too, of how do they feel like they're part of a team? Sometimes you have to dress the part. Like over to the right, that's actually initial staff photos. I just thought it was a fun photo. We would always show up in branded gear at events. So the left, that is what every year has unique swag that makes people want to come back to volunteering at Nocturne because it's unique every year. So really having that like branding and that messaging with what you're wearing and what's being provided to them as also being a part of it. The idea of contributing to the outcome with extremely large scale events, such as the North American Indigenous Games. I know that Canada Games does this, as well as all sporting events. There's typically a volunteer leadership program. This also happens with the Olympics, FIFA. There are people who take on a much bigger contribution, and they might be a site lead, or they'll take on something that we might think of in more day-to-day operations that's like, oh, should that be paid? Should that? But like, especially in games ideology, you'll take on roles that will be just for that week that are quite important, that are very big uh, contributions. And it's a way of also people who could not work full time for an organization be like, I was a site lead for export at this event. So you're also giving them a title in that volunteer leadership. So they might be the site lead for X day or the sports lead, technical lead, and somebody who you can bring into meetings to plan certain planning meetings. Obviously, not all, they're not staff, but having that sense of connection and belonging to the mission and for that the title, because that's also like, even though they're bringing specific skills, it can be growth of their own skills as well, of that reciprocal nature of what they're doing when they are leadership volunteers. I have this photo here because when I brought up swag and people looking different, at the games we had visual representation of what your role was. So the yellow t-shirts are general volunteers, and they're not showing them there, but we gave them black hats, our general volunteers. And our leadership volunteers, there's one here, they wore blue and they had a light gray hat. So there was a visual delineation of who to turn to. So if you were trying to find somebody to answer a question, you do that. Staff were in black t-shirts and all medical personnel had red. So it's even like a visual representation of who to turn to for different reasons. And also that recognition of who they are when they're there. So I guess I brought the part of like, they become part of that consistent messaging and of also that creation. So if they become the holders, as I said here, of that sense of belonging. So if you can imbue to them, you're likely to, at NAG, we had 300 leadership volunteers out of our 3,000. And I would have met most of them and had direct connections with them. The whole volunteer team, it was not just me running the 3,000 volunteers. By the end of it, there was 6 staff on our volunteer programs team. And all of us would have met different people and ensured that that messaging remained consistent. So ensuring that, they are part of the holders of responsibility, but also of that similar messaging. So ensuring that that flow of information is consistent and correct is really a huge part of it as well. So for the idea of setting expectations, so while we do this in volunteer experiences that are not large scale events, there's a few setting of expectations that can really help ensure that success. So one is communications. Volunteers should know who they'll be taking directions from. So again, it might be your leadership person in a different color t-shirt. It comes from a text message, who it's going to be from, and ensuring that your messaging, I'm sure we all do this, but that, if all volunteer messaging comes from like the same email. So we had a central email with, there was a general volunteer email, all major messaging would go out through that. So they're not looking for different names, they're not looking for different contacts. And it would be like, it would come under the same banner. So you're not hearing from Jane and Joe, similar but different things. It's ensuring that it's all coming from the same source. And while I wrote same people, it might not always be the same people because staffing can change, but the same role. So if it's like volunteer coordinator, volunteer whoever, or that they're hearing from their volunteer leader. So those past communication should remain consistent and the same and should be communicated as to you'll be hearing, it might be through your volunteer software or email. If there's multiple forms of communication, that they're always the same. So that can avoid confusion. Also with training, so setting the assumptions of directly from training. So what this is, I'll also share a lesson learned that I got from this. I used to say for the Nocturne one, I think the second year that I was the volunteer manager for Nocturne, I was like, I'll try to meet as many of you as possible. It'll be myself or a board member who will come meet you. And I did have a schedule for people who were on the board or staff to be connecting, but we had two groups that did not have visits from staff or a board member and were upset. They're like, we expected this. We would have liked people to come and relieve us for a bathroom break. We would have done this. So by saying that, I set an expectation that was not met. And so now I changed the language to, excuse me, we do our best to meet as many of you as possible. If you need a washroom break, you are relieved to do that. Collaborate with your other volunteers. So even just like tweaking of language of assumptions can completely change expectations and disappointments. So again, being very clear of where they'll get their essentials of you'll be provided X swag, you'll be getting X recognition. I made sure even for NAG, not that it was anything bad, but due to there's expectations for certain sports, the week of the event, myself and other staff actually delivered first thing in the morning. We'd wake up at 5:30. I do an email to all volunteers, and then we pick up coffee and deliver it to certain venues that started early. But because of the number of venues we had to hit, some people weren't getting it exactly at 7. And so I had one lead volunteer who was upset with me. He's like, people get here at 7, the coffee has to be here at 7. And I told him, I was like, I have to hit 6 venues from where I am. So that could have been even in us saying that, it's like, it'll be provided in the morning rather than like, it'll be provided when you arrive. So there can allow that communication to allow some flexibility for yourself and for other volunteers and for the reality of your own commitment that you'll be able to support. Expectations can also be visual cues and visual reminders. These are just, I couldn't find my NAG badge and I was so sad. This one, for example, you'll see, this is a number of years ago for Nocturne, it says all access, but the volunteer one will say volunteer, or it'll show the different zones that you're allowed to go. And on the back of our NAG one, it was a QR code to volunteer manual. This one to the right is actually from when I volunteered at the Junos when they were here in Halifax in 2024. And it was a reminder of what we could and couldn't do. And so like you have it on you and you have that visual cue on your badge of don't post any credential or social media platforms. Here it's over, that it's non-transferable. So it's reminding you a bit of what you can and cannot do. If it's a very large event, for anyone who's volunteering at FIFA, which is extremely large scale, they will also have different access codes on it, different image for the, because of security reasons for the NAG badge, we had people's photos. So it can have expectations, it can have links, and that way they'll have that on them. So there's different visual cues and do this. So when it comes to cross-departmental buy-ins, you have the actual things that you do for your volunteers, but then what do you have to do within the organization? So you don't only train volunteers, you have to train staff about what's needed and what you need to do. So really you have to get that idea across about what you need from different departments for the program to be a success. And also for your event or your festival to also be a success. This is a bit of a joke, but it's not at all. Marketing and comms has to be your best friend. When I worked at NAG, the person who is the Marcoms manager, our desks faced each other, so I could just like pop up and ask her things. But we worked from I started, there was just 8 staff. At the end, there was 50, but we created a full plan of how to hit our goals. I had like a full policy, procedures for so many different things, but we came up with a very clear Marcoms plan, and they had significant budget attributed to that as well. To understand, especially for such large scale recruitment, getting messaging and having people raising awareness is your first step in getting people recruited. So it's a big part of awareness building and recruitment and of getting people excited was a part of that. So having budget, if possible, and having a clear external comms plan and marketing plan to get people awareness is really high. So here is some examples of cross-departmental buy-in. So again, we collaborated on that outreach plan. They also had bus ads that I was on. For anyone who's in Halifax, you might know my face from that. There was digital ads. This one is here. There was also collaboration with the CBC. Like in the lead up to CBC collaborated with us, and we had a volunteer spotlight series for a lot of our leadership volunteers. And they supported us at a lot of events and with outreach. And so if we realized that we're slowing down or recruitment, even if it was a recruitment plan, I would turn to the volunteer manager and director and be like, okay, where are we missing? Like, how is our messaging not getting across to X group? How do you think we could improve that plan? So not just coming in with, you have to help us with this, but how that curiosity and also respecting their expertise and knowledge just as much as I requested for them to respect my expertise and knowledge as well. But again, that was very large scale. There was also ads on the radio, and that weren't just building awareness for the volunteer program, but the games overall. So people would attend and become part of the citywide event. Nocturne, there is a communications plan, and they were very responsive to communications requests. So compared to NAG's 50+ staff, Nocturne only has 2 full-time staff. I'm sure if you think of all the festivals you enjoy going to, you'll be shocked at how little staff that they have. And then there's usually about 3 contract staff. So I usually go on as a contract with them, or have for the past few years. Even having much smaller budget, but even a budget of how to push that out to ensure it's reaching the right people. As there is a big turnover every year, we have about 20-25% of people who stick with us like from one year to the next, but a lot of folks are students. A lot of people are, if it's at nighttime, your life might change and you might not be able to volunteer at night. So they're also extremely supportive, but we always come in with a plan and a timeline of when to put that out. Because you also have to ensure, is your registration actually open, and how to make sure that it's creating an impact. I would say also, don't be scared of sharing your wins publicly. Be extremely proud of all of the milestones that you're hitting. Um, we had time at every meeting when I was with NAG of being like, this is our numbers, this is like how many people we've recruited, this is how many we've trained. Obviously, for 3,000 people to actually volunteer, our actual internal goal was people who signed up was over 4,000, because we knew there would always be people who would not be able to actually show up volunteer, might not finish all of the training, and might not be able to actually make that commitment. So it was sharing those wins. We had a leaderboard. I think we bought a cake the day that we actually hit 3,000 registered. So making it as public as possible, and sharing with staff, especially when we were looking for leadership volunteers, and our venue and sports staff shared with them when we're like, look, you now have a full team at these venues, and making those shared wins, not only wins to ourselves. I'd also do the same with Nocturne, of being like, okay, we've hit, like deciding what those milestones are and celebrating with everybody. So it's like the direct communication. And staff can also be your biggest advocates. So I went really fast through that. We can go through everything, but I think the three, because I was told by Deb, people start dropping off at about a quarter to. So I wanted to allow us time to discuss some of these things. So what I want you to leave with today is the idea of how you can create a positive volunteer experience, even if it's not coming from you. So again, thinking of systems and scale and how they can work in a systemized way. Why setting expectations is necessary and powerful, and the power of cross-departmental support, especially with your best friends in Marcoms. So do you have any questions or anything folks would like to go back to discuss?
Maybe back to Saskia's. Hers was the first question. If anybody else has any questions, please put them in chat or raise your hand. So Saskia's question was, oh, I've lost it. Saskia, do you mind telling us your question again? Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Saskia.
No, either way. Thank you.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I was just curious about training around cultural sensitivity, especially with Indigenous games. How do you prepare a diverse team of volunteers?
So I guess I'll answer that in two parts of the actual training and how we prepared diverse volunteers. So the actual training was, we had a director of community engagement, and Serene Porter. And she's somebody I've continued to work with. Many of our staff as well at the games goal. So I am not, I'm French Canadian, but the goal is to have almost 50% of our staff be Indigenous. And we created cultural awareness training. And so there was, before somebody became an approved volunteer with the games, and I also do that the with Nocturne, but they had two trainings they had to complete. One was introduction to the games. It was a 1 hour training of the history of the games, what they are, why they exist. The second was cultural awareness training that focused on the history of both the land where the games happened, which is Mi'kma'ki, and that whole region, the history of that region, as well as a general history of Indigenous peoples in Canada, and reconciliation. We spoke about the Truth and Reconciliation Report. NAG is, I think, number 88, part of the TRC report of the government funding the North American Indigenous Games. So when it comes to diverse volunteers and preparing them for that, the diversity, people, it can be of all backgrounds, all ages, and all different knowledge bases. So there's some people for the cultural awareness training was just like things they already knew. But the cultural awareness training for some was a shock. and it was like who didn't know much about residential school system, didn't know much about the history of those things. So, but also we prepared, our part of my goal, our goal was to have 10% of our volunteers minimum be Indigenous. So there could be that reflection and connection with, we had a higher percentage of that and another percentage as well because there are a number of Indigenous folks whose uh, you know, first language isn't English. It might be their, Indigenous language and then French, or French and then their Indigenous language and then English. So we also aim to have 10% of our volunteers be French speakers. And so we planned when we came to doing outreach and the planning of that, we tried to ensure that some of that diversity would be reflected in our actual volunteer pool. And we had different bandanas. I think I have the French speaking one somewhere I could show you of like people could wear it as a visual marker. Just like the t-shirts, there's a visual marker. Red was that you're Indigenous, blue is that you're a French speaker. So if people had questions, they could come up directly to you. So yeah, the cultural awareness training was an hour and a half. We provided all training in different format. One was live in person. I think we had almost 50 training events in total. There was live in person, there was live online, then there was self-directed online. But we found the most impactful was typically in person, but it couldn't be for everybody because not everybody was based in Halifax or Dartmouth. We had a number of volunteers who were parents or friends of the athletes who were coming from all across North America and Turtle Island.
You've got
But
another
great
question there.
Yeah.
Do you see it?
Yes. So from Tara, how do I become best friends with Marcoms when they're so swamped that anything volunteer related becomes the last thing on their list? I think that's a tough question, but I think um, I had a weekly meeting with my like equivalent person who is the Marcom's manager, and having her buy into the importance of that was essential. And I think depending on the actual person-to-person relationship you have with um, that one person, it can also might have to become a directive. I'm seeing Robin put a note here. She said, Tara, I wonder if this comes down to leadership conversation, that volunteers not only give their time, but you can become advocates, donors, and clients. Yes. So even if you share the idea of volunteer stewardship as a part of the success of your organization, and that doesn't have to be targeted just at Marcoms, you can ask to do that as part of a all staff meeting. Even getting that information of being like, okay, if you have 100 volunteers, what type of impact do they have? How many are donors? How are they contributing to the overall health of your organization? And really finding those advocates and ensuring that they're doing that, building that plan together. So I think the first thing to do is go in with the idea that volunteers are valuable and that they're essential to the health of your organization, and ensure that it's part of them being swamped and not something they're going to put to the side, which is much easier said than done.
Do we have any other
Yeah.
questions? Oh, one new. Oh, it's still responding. Do we have any other questions? I know I do. So if nobody else does, I know I want to hear about your volunteer management software. What did you use and how did you
Oh,
use it?
oh, great. I also put this up here if anybody wants to reach out to me. Um, so for NAG, we had to use something called GEMS Pro. Has anyone heard of GEMS Pro? It's used for, it is not a volunteer specific software. It is an overall games software. And because I also have, I'm sure all of us have very varied professional baggage and things you bring to it. So I also have a background in UX and not the technical side of apps, but the uploading of information in it. So I became the owner of everything happened on GEMS Pro, except for the medical section. And so I created the application for our volunteers was via GEMS Pro. The team inputting would be on GEMS Pro. And it's a software that does what it has to do, but it looks like it's from an earlier part of this century, we'll say. And I'd say like it allowed for direct messaging, direct email, direct texting. So that was great. And you could like figure out, be like, okay, is this a leadership volunteer? You could like contact them via group. But some things had to be manually updated, such as if people had done um, and if there became, so we had a lot of preset messages in English and French that would be like, you are now an approved volunteer, but we had to have them do the both trainings. We had to have vulnerable sector check, and we had to get something else from them before they could become an approved volunteer. So a lot of it was that, but a lot of similar messaging was put out for the plates. For Nocturne, we use sign up because it's just something that's annual, and that's not something that you need month to month. So use like a paid version of sign up for about 3 months from when registration launches to the actual shifts. So that's not what I'd recommend for people who have ongoing volunteers. And GEMS Pro, I would say, is only really useful for games settings. Like Canada Games uses them for everything like that. And other sporting events you use them.
Anybody else have any
Um,
questions? Oh, yeah, Natalia has one. Do you see it there?
Any screening you do for event volunteers, you mentioned doing the vulnerable sector check. So I would say, yes, they're very different for both these events. Because one of them is, I would say NAG was higher, there's definitely higher risk factors because you're serving youth. And part of the training was also not to be alone with the youth, of being like, the buddy system, always having more than one adult or somebody around them. Uh, but yes, for leadership volunteers, we had interviews. Um, and those were documented, and then we placed them from there. And we had to have vulnerable sector checks. We used My Back Check, and that was a software that we used for doing that to get I think it was actually the extended police information check, and would ask people if anything came up that we should be aware of. Um, having something, we made it very clear that having something did not exclude them from anything, but we're like, if you had a DOI, we will not approve you to be a driver, like it's also in recognizing that there's barriers to the extended police checks, and that there are populations who are more targeted than others for having a record. So we made that very clear as well, especially when it came to recruiting diverse volunteers. In what ways do you keep volunteers long term? So Addie, do you mean that for the games or for Nocturne? Because from the games. So it was the long-term version of it is we launched the recruitment. You could sign up, register to be a volunteer starting a year out, only 12 months before the actual game started. So we had a 1 year out event on July 15th, 2022. And it was a really large event with it was also a mission meetings. That means there was reps from all the different regions where the youth were coming from. And it was on APTN and CBC as a big launch of now our registration is open. It was only a year out. So long term for us was only a year and 10 days. That was how long we needed people to be engaged and involved for. Um, and that could be pretty long, but for the leadership volunteers, once we created those teams, there was monthly meetings, there was recognition events, but it wasn't a 5 year plan that we had going for people. We didn't have that. There was social events in the lead up to, because most of a lot of the volunteers was more from like the January to May for the sign up. But that was what long term was for us.
Thank you, Saskia. Saskia's put something there if you're interested in getting volunteer checks in the GTA. We'll have to read it. Any other questions? I know I have one.
Go ahead.
I'm always debating. I always have a ton of questions. I love learning. I'm always debating between virtual orientation and training as opposed to in person. And of course, I find in person more effective. But what was your way of ensuring that those that could only do it virtually actually retain the information?
So, after the training, either if it was in person or virtual, they would get, once we like updated in their GEMS Pro thing, we like thank them for doing it. It was uh, the messaging. By the time I led so many of the trainings, I could like do them in my sleep by the end. Um, but the retaining of information, is both to people. There was also a fair amount of repetition. I know I was working with an organization last year, and they're like, "Oh, you repeated this. You don't need to repeat it." I was like, "We need to say at the beginning what we want to achieve, say it in the middle, and then repeat it again at the end." But there would be a simplified version of the information that we shared with the volunteers. Also, I think I didn't go too deeply into it. I'm going to go back here of um, the visual reminders, volunteer
Mm.
badges training. Oh, maybe, okay. Um, Having on-site, because there's so many sites, especially with um, here, one of them isn't like the badges, but we had uh, on-site binders, which seems very old school, but it would be just like an overview of everything. And we also would have like a simplified version of the slides that was shared with them. There would be all of the slides for the training of the welcoming to like the introduction, as well as the cultural awareness training that were in those binders, if at that site anybody had to review everything. So we also created these full binders that had all the policies, the procedures, the expectations. So while that seems like a lot of paper and a lot of information, having those cues if somebody misunderstood something or they weren't sure. We also had the volunteer handbook, which was fully virtual, as well as being part of that printed version. The handbook had all of the main information from it. So it's like, why does it exist? It started in this year by this person. So all of that information wasn't just provided to them once in the training, it was provided again in the manuals and also in the handbook. So I think repetition is key to ensuring people remember stuff.
Thank you. Any other questions before we close up for the day?
Could I just briefly ask what you would consider what was the difference for you between a handbook and a manual?
Good question.
Okay, that feels like a big, so handbook and a manual. I think your handbook for us was something, I think we had it maxed out at 5. It's like a reminder of information for the specific volunteer. So we had it as a digital print. A manual was much more extensive. So we had like site manuals. So those site binders had not only the full training information for both what are the games and what are cultural awareness training, but it was all the policies and procedures that were unique to that venue. Everything from emergency plans to contact information of who they should reach out to. I think, is that the good answer?
Yes, that makes sense to me. Thank you so much.
Yeah, apologies if I used the wrong word when I was doing my initial explanation. But thank you, Tara.
Any other questions? Lots of learning today. Unbelievable. Well, oh, a phenomenal efforts. Thank you, Robin. I should be asking you to give the thank you. So I want to thank you very, very much, Alex, for joining us. And I'm so glad we connected and that we can be able to hear from our other volunteer professionals on other parts of the country. That makes me happy. So thank you, everyone, for taking the time out of your day. And Alex, thank you for an excellent presentation. As I said before, you're very articulate and you're easy to listen to. Oh, thank you, Saskia and Pavro. Thank you. All right. Everybody have a great afternoon and enjoy the day. Thank you. Thanks, Alex. Anything you'd like to say just as we're going?
Yeah, again, thank you for all for coming out. I know it's a big deal to give an hour of your time in a busy work day, and I tried for this to be jam-packed as much as possible for it's actually actionable as well as some storytelling. If you want to reach out to me, my email is up there on the screen, or you can find me under Alexandra, my full name, Cherry, on LinkedIn. So I'd love to stay connected if any of you want to connect.
Thanks. And as I'm planning for the fall, if any of you have any suggestions on speakers or you possibly are interested in speaking, please reach out to me. You can find my email through Pavro. And thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.